Let's talk about spoilers. Everyone draws the line differently on how much they want to see of a game before they play it, but for me personally, it's here 2 weeks before release that things always kind of start to get awkward. Marketing starts to show too much, early copies of the game sometimes get into circulation, and it's now, more than any other point, that I think you have to be careful if you want to preserve some of your first experience. So, this video does contain new information and new areas, but the footage I'm going to share with you is pretty tame. I'm only going to inform you of new game mechanics, and I'm mostly just going to talk about how the game has changed, specifically in the network test area and since the network test version. Recently, I was asked to sit down with the final build of the game, and I was told I could talk about pretty much everything, which is an overwhelming thought as a creator. Obviously, I'm very privileged to have been in this position, but as you might imagine, being told this is kind of anxiety-inducing because you have the whole incredible game at your fingertips, but only for a short amount of time. So I wonder, what would you do? The logical thing is just to rush through a lot of the game. Your time is limited, but you can go everywhere and talk about everything, so you feel like you have to experience as much as you can, or else your content won't be as good as the competition's. Therefore, tons of creators and outlets are going to be vying for your attention with what they've found. I don't think this is necessarily wrong, I just think that you should know that it's going to be a free-for-all right now, and a lot of unique discoveries are going to be talked about, because this is an open world game, and you can run very far on torrent in 6 hours. One outlet in particular has been talking about their time with the final build for weeks, and I read an area spoiler from them that I really wish I hadn't, so keeping that personal experience in mind, when I played the final build, the area that I explored the most was actually just the network test zone. I think I'd rather just talk about this area that we've all had a chance to see and experience, So this is old footage of the network test, where I just went around looking at the scenery, and it'll be good to explain what's changed since this version. So the first thing from the network test that I can explain are these gargoyle statues and this fog wall that's behind them. These statues take something called Stone's Ward keys, and these keys are essentially Pharros Lockstones from Dark Souls 2. They are a key that is limited in number that gets used up every time you use it. I found a few of these keys when I was playing through the game. You can actually choose one as a starting gift for your character, and I found a lot of these gargoyles and gates where they could be used, and every single time I used one, I got a special weapon or a special item. So clearly they're a way for you to get powerful gear or items, or maybe even unlock a shortcut, like they are in Dark Souls 2, I suppose. Next thing I want to say is that the UI has been updated. For example, health bars, focus bars, stamina bars, they all look a bit more worn, and they have a sort of golden embellishment around their edges. Here we have Kale. Kale sells very different things in the final build of the game. He no longer sells weapons, I believe, and he no longer sold me any spirit summons. He did sell something new called notes. These are essentially like memos from Sekiro. They're basically something you can read that tells you about a secret location or gives you a hint about something. Just then, I was looking at that island, which is the Altar of Dragon Communion. In the network test, you could trade a dragon heart for Grail's Roar, but in the final build of the game, you can trade a dragon heart for one of 3 different dragon spell attacks. You can get Dragon Maw, which bites, you can get Dragon Claw, which swipes, and you can also get Dragon Fire, which was already in the network test somewhere else. So here is Stormfoot Catacombs, and this was one of the first dungeons that I explored, and it was here that I noticed, oh man, yeah, this is the final build of the game, because enemies were dropping their weapons, the items I was finding were way less powerful, just more like they were tuned to a character that was just starting out at the very start of the game, and the same goes for Groveside Cavern, which is just ahead here. I didn't get the Flask of Wondrous Physic from this boss, maybe as expected. That's a really powerful potion, and it was present in the network test, and that's when you realize the network test had all of these powerful things, and this final build of the game was much harder because you started as, a normal starting character that didn't have spells or didn't have strong equipment, and, the game was harder as a result. A lot of people criticized the network test for being too easy, but it was too easy for a lot of people because we were playing with like really powerful weapon arts and really powerful spells and things that had obviously been put in by the developers to make our experience more smooth. Right here, actually, you see that fire that I just knocked that soldier into? I looked at that for the longest time when I was playing the final build because it had 3 butterflies fluttering around it, and at first I thought it was just a graphical improvement, but no, they've actually added the smoldering butterfly as a craftable resource that you can loot from a lot of the fires in the game, and it looks really pretty. In this area, I looted a few things. The item in this carriage, I believe, is the flail, which is the hanging ball and chain. I also looted a greatsword, which I used throughout most of my playthrough, and ended up regretting, because I'm not much of a greatsword user. But in that camp, I also looted my first Ash of War, and it came with an item called a whetstone knife, which I believe is the method by which you apply Ashes of War at Grace checkpoints. This knife is a key item, and I think you just get this knife whenever you loot your first Ash of War. I don't think it's something you actually have to find there. Another key item I found this in the Demi-Human Cave, were tailoring tools, which enables armor alterations at sites of grace. For a long time, people were wondering if you could add or remove cloaks from certain sets of armor, and I can confirm that yes, you can add or remove cloaks for a small cost to your armor, and I assume you can change your armor in a myriad of different ways depending on the armor set, which is very, very cool for the people who love Fashion Souls. Down here, I actually look through this veil. This is where the network test ends, and that leads towards sort of eastern Limgrave. Down there is a deep forest with bears and other really intimidating creatures. Honestly, going down there and venturing into this, beyond where you don't have a map, it's intimidating because you get used to having the map in the network test, but when you don't have one, you're really looking out for those obelisks that give you a map and help to guide you where you're going, because you feel very lost, and the world feels even larger when you're lost, which is something I noticed. Here at the Post Town Remains, I cleared that out, and it's actually very similar to the network test in that Pumpkinhead is down there, and Sorceress Sellen is also still there, although there's been some visual upgrades to the cellar that she resides in, which looks nice. This roaming carriage in the network test gave you the Crucible set, but in the final build of the game, it gives you a Great Axe, which I didn't use, but I assume is pretty powerful and a pretty insane strength build weapon. So we're heading towards southern Limgrave now, and as I was in this area in the final build, there was like a little war going on. I think it was towards the left here. There was a war going on between some soldiers of Godric and some demi-humans that were having like an all-out brawl here. I let them fight each other, always helping the losing side and evening the odds until they were all dead. And this game is just cool, like drawing you towards points of interest that are always going on around the map. I thought that was interesting. But speaking of the map, we couldn't go here in the network test, but there's a giant landmass to the south, and on that landmass there is a walking island that you would have seen in the early trailers for the game. So I figured out what these islands are for. They have to do with a mechanic in the game called Remembrance, and Remembrance, I believe, I'm not 100% certain, but I believe Remembrance is a way of duplicating boss souls, which obviously is very useful because, a lot of boss souls in Dark Souls games are able to be transposed into weapons, and you might want more than one of those souls to get more than one weapon from them, so those islands do serve a purpose. So in this footage I warp away from the Dragonburnt ruins, but make sure you explore the Dragonburnt ruins in the final build. It's very different. If you like the Twin Blade, that's where you can find the Twin Blade, and there is another chest there with some just incredible loot. It'll just blow you away. You might recall, in the network test, the Dragonburnt ruins gave you the Crimson Talisman, which increases the amount of health you would have had on your character. Talismans function like rings did in Dark Souls, and rings in Elden Ring are more like items that you use with a story significance, so that's why they're called talismans in this game. That's what Miyazaki said, anyway. But talismans in this game seem to be really interesting. I found a lot of talismans that related to the type of weapon I was using. For example, there was a Twin Blade Talisman that increases the amount of damage done by the final attack in your Twin Blade Flurry. There was a Curved Sword Talisman, which increases the amount of guard counter damage you do with your curved swords. And there was an Axe Talisman that increases the amount of damage done by charge attacks with your axe. So the talismans that you find are actually very specific in a lot of cases to the type of build that you're going for. Oh, and another thing I found interesting in the final build was the scarcity of smithing stone shards. In the network test on this plateau that we're on right now, back there was a statue that gave you 6 of them if you broke it. Right in front of me there used to be one here as loot, and all of the giants in this area used to drop 1 smithing stone shard every time you killed one. In the final build, the giants didn't drop a shard every time. That statue back there only gave me 3, and the smoldering giant up here, for example, in the network test, he gives you 3, but in the final build, he gave me none. The only place I found a lot of smithing stone shards were the caves where there was lots of miners, and I guess that makes a lot of sense, so you're definitely going to be incentivized to seek out caverns and miners and loot the shards from that place in order to upgrade your weapon. So yeah, a lot of the stuff that I'm describing does make the game harder for sure. Right up here, for example, this Evergaol, it doesn't contain the Bloodhound anymore. Instead, it contains a Crucible Knight boss, and I couldn't beat this guy. I didn't try very many times, admittedly, but he basically one-shot me and was very difficult to defeat, which just makes me so excited to play the final game and beat my head against a wall until the wall breaks, until I can beat bosses that give me trouble, because that's how I kind of play. I get pretty stubborn about beating a boss, and I couldn't do that in this final build. I couldn't set my mind to defeating something and spend hours on it because, I would miss out on so much more of the game. The Scavenger's Shack is something you should explore in the final build, by the way. Don't just assume it's empty. It's not empty at all in the final build. And you'll notice I haven't talked about Spirit Summons yet. Spirit Summons were harder to find in the final build, at least in my experience. The Summoning Bell, the item you get to summon them, is found in the early game, so you don't have to worry about that. But the summons themselves, the items, I only found, I think, 2 in the final build. I could be wrong, but honestly the one that I found was so powerful. It was called Soldiers of Godric, and it summoned 2 knights. One of them was a melee fighter, and the other one wielded a crossbow and stood in the back, and they were still really powerful. I don't think the final build has changed the power level of spirit summons much at all. But then the spirit summons that you summon do use FP, so the strength of a summon is dependent on how much FP it consumes. So this is an easy way for From Software to tweak the power of spirit summons in the future if some are used too often. I'm sure they'll have data on that. There are some spirit summons I found that used so much FP to summon that I couldn't summon them with my FP bar. I had to upgrade my mind stat in order to even use them. The Soldiers of Godric summons were found in this jellyfish graveyard, by the way. Oh, another thing that happened that I forgot to mention was that I was riding my mount on the beach, and all of a sudden it started to rain down with these golden leaves from the Erd Tree, and I noticed that my character actually got a buff at this moment. I thought that was a really cool dynamic sort of weather effect. I don't know what the buff did, but the thought that you can just randomly get a buff as an environmental effect is pretty cool, and I can imagine that happening and you being like, yeah, I'm gonna fight the boss that's nearby with this buff active that will give me an advantage. Oh, and if you go north past Stormveil, you'll actually discover a shortcut hidden in the bushes that cuts through the cliffside and turns into a cave, and then you're on the edge of the cliff, and it takes you to an area that's not Stormveil. I was always thinking that Stormveil would sort of be like a funneling point for progression, but it seems like you can bypass it and keep going, which is really interesting. And after making it to the end of Stormveil Castle, I see why you might want to bypass Stormveil Castle. Godric, the demigod boss at the end of this place, I thought I was pretty geared at the end of my session, but I tried him about 3 times and I just walked away because I was getting absolutely destroyed, and I thought I was doing pretty well up until that point. And after exploring Stormveil for a little while, I'm not sure exactly when this happens, but eventually you get invited to Round Table Hold, which, as you probably know by now, is a hub area, and it's amazing. I don't want to spoil why I think it's amazing. You've seen maybe one screenshot of it, but just the atmosphere and the NPCs in this hub area make it so fucking enchanting and incredible. I was absolutely in love with this hub area from the time that I played. So I hope I'm walking the line with spoilers on a pretty good level. Just look forward to so many things. There's so many things to look forward to. I think the last thing I'm going to leave you with is this clip, this piece of video that they gave me to show off. There's a painting here, and when you touch it, a little fog dissipates and something in your world has changed. Guess what it is? On the painting there's a visual. It shows a part of Limgrave, and if you go to where this painting depicts, a short event will happen. And I love this mechanic because it really rewards players that are paying attention to the world around them and the map, and if you don't know where a place is, it might feel a bit like a treasure hunt and trying to find it from contextual clues. I think this is such a cool thing. I know a lot of you might be wondering where I've been for the last month or so since my last video. I haven't posted on Twitter, I didn't make any videos even though I had 2 lore videos planned. I've been working on Soul Arts, which is the art book that I've been curating. I had to write over 100 entries. I had to work on so many design elements of the book, and finally, just the other day, we launched the digital edition to Kickstarter backers, which was really exciting, and in April, the final version of the book will be sent out to everyone who pre-ordered a copy through Kickstarter or pre-ordered through the publisher's site. I'll leave a link to the book that you can pre-order if that's something that's interesting to you. But yeah, now that I'm done with that for the most part, I can focus on Elden Ring. I'm going to have, hopefully, 2 more lore videos talking about the network test lore and also the lore that I've gleaned from the final build. And I don't think talking about lore is really a spoiler because I don't think learning about the fundamentals of a story can really spoil your game experience, you know? I feel like learning about the fundamentals will enrich your experience when you do play Elden Ring. So there are a few more videos coming, and that is the goal for this channel, is to enrich your experience with the games that we love, and I hope that I achieved that in this video. I know it's an awkward line that I had to walk, but I think I did okay. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.